From the City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, Space Chronicles with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Get ready for that. And a happy birthday to Barbara in Redding, California, or as your friends would say, happy birthday, Schmucky. That's what they call her. Here's what's happening. Well, the big one could be coming to the west coast of the United States. Scientists who are studying the Fukushima earthquake have uncovered data that predicts a big one in the Pacific Northwest, along with the coasts of Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia in Canada. The Fukushima quake was precipitated by what is called the Tohoku area of underwater plates, and an earthquake expert, John Anderson, says the Cascadia subduction zone can be seen as a mirror image of this area. When Anderson compiled ground motion data from the Japanese quake and overlaid it on a map of the Pacific Northwest, which has a similar fault line offshore, the two faults dovetailed almost identically. The Northwest's only nuclear power plant, by the way, is the 28-year-old Columbia Generating Station, which is out in that region. So we shall see. By summer, gasoline prices should reach an all-time high of almost $5 a gallon. They're already $4 a gallon in many places. California, it's already getting close to $5 a gallon. Howard Bloom, the genius of the beast, with us. Howard, at what point does this threshold at $5 crush the economy?
Well, there is speculation that the price could go to 4 times that because there is a burning fuse on Iran's nuclear weapons. And there are two nations that are scared to death of those weapons. One is Israel, we all know about that. The other is Saudi Arabia, which has been involved in a secret war with the Iranians. And those tensions could close off the Persian Gulf. And if there is an attack on Iran, the price of a barrel of gasoline can go up from $120, which it is roughly now, to $200, $300, $400, in which case gasoline will become unaffordable.
And what does that do to everything? I mean, diesel costs go through the roof. Truck drivers can't take their goods to stores. I mean, it's going to have a domino effect, won't it?
It destroys the American economy, and one of the wisest things that George Bush has ever said as president was that we have an addiction to oil. We have to get off of it. You know my solution. It's harvesting solar power in space where it's endless and sending it down to Earth, but that's 30 years off. And right now we have to do everything in our power to end the addiction to oil.
We're going to see what happens. Howard, thanks so much. Howard Bloom. T.J. Lane was charged on 6 counts, including 3 counts of aggravated murder related to this week's fatal shooting of 3 students at an Ohio high school. The prosecutor said the 17-year-old will most likely be tried as an adult. He's got a hearing on March 19th. It's tied to a motion to transfer his case to an adult court. Her tragic situation there. Now, this is not Lane's first brush with the law. According to juvenile records, when he was 15, he was charged with assault for putting his uncle in a chokehold and punching him in the face. Police were called on that. But, you know, even though a number of kids are bullied and pushed around and they've got lousy upbringings, they don't end up killing, they don't end up murdering people. But just to give you a little highlight of this youngster's life, his parents had both been charged with domestic violence against each other, according to court documents. His father served prison time for assaulting a police officer and also was charged with holding a different woman under running water and bashing her head into a wall. So who knows how they treated him. A couple found guilty of murdering a teenager in London. They had accused the teenager of using witchcraft. They have now been found guilty. The Food and Drug Administration has warned patients taking cholesterol-fighting statins that they face a small increase in the risk of higher blood sugar levels and of being diagnosed with diabetes, raising concerns about one of the country's most widely prescribed groups of drugs, a story we had a few days ago here on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Robin Falkub with us to talk about this for a moment. Robin, first of all, with this warning, what does it exactly mean?
Well, they're trying to alert people to the side effects so that they'll be more aware, except they've neglected to mention some of the serious ones. But there has been some admission in the latest FDA report about mental fogginess, fuzzy thinking, problems along those lines, and they feel that at this point the threats of liver damage are not as, that they're very rare, that shouldn't be a big concern. But there is the risk, definitely, for developing diabetes, and then the risk that they did not mention, which just had me very concerned, George, was that they didn't talk about rhabdomyolysis.
Now, what's that?
Okay, that's a condition where the statins, aside from depleting the body of coenzyme Q10, this is when the skeletal muscle fibers break down, and that breakdown releases a substance called myoglobin. And myoglobin, when it gets into the bloodstream, has to be filtered by the kidneys, and it is very harmful and often causes kidney damage. There are risk factors that can increase that if someone is alcoholism, obviously crush injuries, if the muscle fibers themselves are damaged, heat stroke, seizures. And for the rhabdomyolysis, you have to worry about abnormal urine color, decreased urine production. It would be a darker color, muscle stiffness or aching, muscle tenderness, muscle weakness, and fatigue, joint pain.
And, Robin, if somebody's on one of these cholesterol-lowering pills, what do? Call their doctor and say, hey, what's this story now about diabetes and all this stuff?
Yeah, they should call because there are many safe alternatives to using these drugs. Public Citizen Health Research Group has petitioned to remove Crestor from the marketplace. This was updated last year, and you don't really hear much about it because there are very serious side effects, including what we just discussed, rhabdomyolysis. So the other side effects can be the problems that can cause cardiac arrest, because if not kidney failure, the potassium that's released from the damaged muscle cells can cause a heart attack.
All right, and let me ask you one other quick question. Had a story about sinus nasal washes, a couple deaths. The CDC says do not use tap water. What do you recommend?
Most definitely no tap water. I recommend people boil water, and it should be or they can use reverse osmosis water or distilled water. There are those instances where 2 deaths occurred from this bizarre amoeba that destroyed brain tissue.
And Robin's website, healthfreedomrights.com. Thank you so much. Celine Dion has begged forgiveness from all her fans after canceling all of her Las Vegas shows until June. Following an examination last week, Dion's doctor diagnosed a weakness in her right vocal cord and prescribed up to 8 weeks of rest. A 95-year-old grandmother terrified her neighbors in China by climbing out of her coffin 6 days after she had died. I kid you not, she was found motionless and not breathing in bed by her neighbor, who kept pushing her. She had tripped, suffered a head injury. When he failed to wake her up, they assumed that she had died, and so they put her in a casket, and off she went. According to tradition, the dead woman was laid in her coffin ahead of the funeral for friends and relatives to pay their respects. The day before the funeral, that neighbor arrived at her house to find the coffin empty, the corpse gone. He was terrified. After searching for the missing body, villagers were stunned to find the old lady sitting in her kitchen cooking. Unbelievable. Up next, someone who cooks all the time, Catherine Austin Fitts. We're going to talk about your pocketbook next on Coast to Coast AM. Well, if you listen to Coast with any regularity, and most of you do, then you know the name Catherine Austin Fitts, former investment banker, former member of HUD, and we turned to her for a number of economic stories. And lo and behold, I went to reach for the phone to get Catherine on, and she wasn't there because she's here. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, George. It's great to be in the studio.
Last time I saw you, we were in Vancouver at an event.
I know. We had a great time. It was great coast to coast people there.
Super. I'm going back to Canada in June. I've got a speaking engagement in Toronto. So I'm looking forward to it. You know what? Our Canadian neighbors love this program. They're just
they do.
Superb people.
They do.
And but it's good to have you here. Lots of things going on. I want to talk with you, first of all, Catherine, about something that hits home to a lot of people, and that's the price of gasoline that is creeping up higher and higher, and I can't remember it this high ever in my life.
Right.
Here in California, it's almost $5 a gallon. In Missouri, near St. Louis, it's in the high threes. It might even be 4 there by now. What's going on?
Well, there are a couple of things. If you look at the strategic game between us and China, it's what I call the oil card. We have a lot of strategic reasons to keep the oil price high. And so if you look at the geopolitics of it, it makes sense. Of course, we know the tensions in the Middle East. And if anything's going to run up oil, it's going to be tensions in the Middle East this year. So,
exactly.
And I think, if you're a consumer, you need to plan on a reasonably good chance that the gas is going to be much, much higher this year.
What's that going to do to the rest of the economy? And what's it going to do to food costs? What's it going to do to the sale of cars? It's going to drive everything up, particularly food. If you look across all the tangibles, George, what we're going through is a reset between paper and real things. And that reset's going to continue. And that's why it's very, very important that people position themselves to protect themselves from that reset. Years ago, Catherine, when gasoline prices would go up, people would simply stay home. Now they don't even have homes to stay in. So what do?
Well, and it's a problem because if you look at the price of a home, George, for the last 50 years has tracked bigger and bigger houses, which are more and more expensive to heat. Now, you're out in L.A., but I live usually in Tennessee, and that
gets cold.
That gets cold. So we're really going to have to adjust our whole way of living for higher oil prices, and across the board, higher water prices. All tangible things are going to be higher.
I think it's just a matter of time before Israel strikes Iran. I mean, I can feel it. I can sense it. What are people in your circle saying about this?
They think the chances of some kind of action to be very high this year.
Yeah. Sooner than later.
It's, it's always hard to say.
Economically, if that happens, where are we with that? What does that do to the presidential election? Does that throw that up in the air?
I think it is likely to happen in a way that will be good for the presidential election. So, we run a war economy, and we're conditioned on war. Now, you see the Joint Chiefs trying to get unstretched from Afghanistan, trying to get unstretched from Iran. But the reality is, if Iran happens, I think it's going to be good for certain interests. So,
all right. So, what do you recommend these days for people at home? What should they do?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that we're going through an enormous change in the economy, George. And, if you look at the stock market, this has been a very good year for the markets. We've opened up strong, and a lot of time the markets are strong in election year. So that's not surprising. But if you look deep into the stock market, what you discover is there's an old world dying and there's a new world birthing. The new technology is having, and because you're in the media business, look at what the shift from desktop to handheld has done.
Oh, huge.
So we're now creating all sorts of new consumer markets globally. It's a combination of globalization and this move from the desktop to the handheld and the pads. And so you're watching enormous creative destruction, and it's very, very important for every household to anticipate how you're positioned in that thing, both your employment, your income, and your assets. So the world is changing, and we all need to change with it. So that's very, very important. But the other thing is debasement is coming. We're in tax season right now.
Yeah.
For my world, everything in March, we have the corporate taxes, a lot of the corporate filings, and that's where the corporations that are really struggling, the pain comes out. Then in April, of course, we have the individual taxes. And one of the big important things that's going to happen this year, George, is the federal government has been dealing with very significant drops in both corporate and individual taxes. And as they experience those drops, we get higher and higher deficits. And the resolution of that's going to be pushed off after the election, but come 2014, we're going to face that. And one of the ways that's going to hit is in debasement, because somebody's going to have to print money. And what we've been watching now for 10 years is tremendous debasement of the dollar, and that's part of what's driving everybody household expenses up. It's going to continue, George.
I would say the Fed will print more money if it has to.
The Fed is printing more money as we speak. And people always say to me, could my gold be confiscated? If you look at what debasement is doing, it's confiscating our wealth right now. It's
chipping away at it.
Very chipping away. So one of the things we all have to be prepared for is inflation of our everyday expenses. So anything you can do to bring down your overhead, to bring down your debt is unbelievably important, and to make sure your income is coming from those parts of the economy that are growing and not dropping.
We're not going to have a total collapse. We'll have some industries that do very well, like you just said.
Yeah. You have industries right now that are doing very, very well. So it's old world to dying, new world birthing. Now, what many people are struggling with is that process was delayed by the housing bubble and the debt bubble.
Right.
We put off the day of reckoning by having a bubble, and of course, the collapse of the bubble makes it harder and tougher.
Well, here we are. We're in an economy that is just weak, just very weak, and it has glimpses of coming back, but it doesn't. It can't take a rapid punch like this.
The great mystery is life goes on, George. So the punch will come, and if you look at how the punch will come, it will be hard on household wallets. At the same time, the geopolitics of America continuing to checkmate China is going to be good for the overall economics. So there's
as buyers, consumers, you mean?
Well, my gas price goes on, but at the same time, America being dominant geopolitically means the value of the dollar stays high. Mm-hmm. The dollar stays the reserve currency, and everybody in America has financially benefited and continues to benefit from the dollar being the reserve currency.
We have talked about who's to blame here. I've talked about Wall Street. You've talked about government. Maybe both?
Well, there are a couple things going on, but I think the most important thing is we have a group of people who are centralizing political and economic control. And they're doing it in a way that I think many of us find it very, very unattractive. Because you're watching the reduction of political participation and political power on the part of the average person. Now, many people think, well, that's being replaced by my consumer power. But we're clearly going to a world where there's centralization of wealth. And I think that's very uncomfortable for people in America who've enjoyed a broad middle class. Now, with that is coming globalization, and of course that opens up all new worlds, all new kinds of opportunities for many, many people. So there's good and there's bad in it, but I think the centralization is very, very uncomfortable.
What are we doing about the housing mess? Is that being fixed?
No. The housing mix, in 1989, when the last housing bubble burst, we had a clearing. We marked to market and we cleared the market and we got on down the road. We're not marking to market. We're simply constantly pumping up the portfolios, and the bank continues to, and the mortgage service
but they're still foreclosing, aren't they?
They're still foreclosing, but the games that are going on, George, are just, the consumer in the housing area is being treated worse than, I hate to say dirt, but it's just the fraudulent and criminal behavior is just still. I mean, we've had the fraudulent inducement of America, and now the servicers continue the sort of pain. So it's a very ugly picture, and we haven't marked to market. We haven't cleared the market. There's so many things that could be done to create liquidity on Main Street. It's not happening for a whole variety of reasons. This is one of it. So the paper has stayed in the banks or that's been purchased by the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve continues to finance it at low rates so that the banks can essentially finance at very inexpensive rates, but the average American who needs to refinance their mortgage can't refinance it because the terms and conditions have changed or the mortgages are underwater. We just had one article today saying over 60% of the mortgages in Nevada are underwater.
60%?
60%, can you imagine?
And there's not enough money to bail those people out.
Well, part of it is, real estate has no value if the people in it don't have income.
That's right. It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. And if you look at the drops in income both to American households and American government, it's enormous. And we need to reinvent we need to re-engineer the whole infrastructure for that drop in cash flow.
And it's got to happen fast. Well, stay with us. Catherine Austin Fitts with us, and we're going to take your phone calls with her when we turn around the corner and come right back on Coast to Coast AM. Her website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Solari, SOLARI.com. I'm George Norrie, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. Catherine Austin Fitts with us. We're going to come right back and take phone calls as we talk about the economy, what you're going to do about your financial future. You know, Catherine, just listening to that paid advertisement, political ad, this is going to be an interesting presidential year. I still don't know what's going to happen.
I don't think it matters.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the old red button problem. Whoever wins is going to get into the Oval Office, and his political guy is going to say, okay, the Americans spent $1 billion to get you elected. They want their check. And he's going to turn to the Secretary of the Treasury and he says, you're going to have to be nice to the people who control, all the dirty money because we need to finance the deficit. I mean, if the deficit is going up every year. We have tax revenues down and unemployment, Social Security, military going up, and so you've got a very fragile empire. You've got a government that doesn't have financial sovereignty, and so whoever walks into that office is going to find themselves in that bind, and there's no way to get out of that bind in the Oval Office. You've got to do it one county at a time.
Well, and it seems like they just keep pushing the problems onto the next administration.
Right.
That pushes them along to the next administration.
Right. Mañana.
Nobody wants to just, bite the bullet, do what you have to do right now.
Well, politically that's hard. If you look at popular opinion, there's no constituency to bite the bullet.
No.
Yeah.
No, nobody wants to accept the fact that you're going to say to them, folks, I'm going to clean this up for the future. It's going to be bad right now, and it's going to hurt you, but in 10 or 20 years from now, it'll be glorious for them, thanks to us.
That's why we're watching debasement. So I can't build a political constituency to balance the budget, but I can build a political constituency of me and the central bank to just debase the currency. So you're financing this, and you're resolving the financial tensions by debasement. And that's why John Williams at Shadow Stats just had a new inflation report. He shows inflation running at 6% and consumer inflation running at 10%. So, George, I've done the statistics several times, but from 2003 on, the purchasing power of most Americans, most dollars, has fallen more than 50%.
Yeah.
So that's how they're financing it. And of course, it's very painful because even though you're increasing the money supply, a lot of that liquidity is not going to Main Street. So Main Street is experiencing falling income and rising expenses. I call that the slow burn. And this debasement is what's eating us alive. So it comes back around in a much more sneaky way. The budget is balanced in this way, sort of behind the scenes. It's not just happening to Americans, it's global, because that's how we're financing a global empire. It's a global taxation system through the balance sheet. We print money, everybody has to take, and then it goes down in value 5% every year.
Okay, back to the phones now. Let's go to our first-time caller, Steve in Dallas, Texas. Steve, good morning. You're on with Catherine. Go ahead.
How you doing? I'm just wondering if your guest or you understand that the spot market price on oil is not what the gas companies pay. The gas companies, especially the ones I know in the Southern Gulf, they buy tens of millions of barrels of gasoline on a purchase order, and they'll take delivery on those barrels anywhere up to 6 months later.
Right.
And the people I talked to, they haven't paid over $50 a barrel in 7 years.
Right.
Now, why people don't understand this, but the $106 market price or spot market price we're talking about is only there to establish a retail price. That's all it's for.
Right, these are
and what a nice retail price it is.
Right, it's an excellent point. Because if you look at, particularly for the big oils, if you look at their finding costs over the last 10 years, George, there is no rationale to describe the difference between the finding cost and the cost at the pump. I think one of my favorite books on the oil market, Jim Norman's Oil Card, published about 5 years ago, estimated at the time that Exxon's finding cost was $4 a barrel. So
that's it.
Oh, yeah, no, we're watching enormous differential between what we pay at the pump and what the finding costs are.
You know, Catherine, I happen to be an abiotic oil believer. I think this planet has an abundance of it. Doesn't necessarily mean we should be using it or burning it, but I do believe that it's here. And, you know, we've got in this country alone untapped billions of barrels of oil.
Let's go back, because you know I'm a financial person. Let's talk about control. If you're going to control the global currency, then you need to control not just
your oil,
the central banks and the military, but you need to control the trade in a critical asset.
That's
so
right.
It's essential that dependency on oil continue, and you continue to keep that price inflated to manage the currency, because it's not just about oil, it's about the whole financial system. One of my theories is the reason they're trying to get such tight control over the seed and food supply is if you're going to roll out a global currency, oil's not going to do it. You need something much more powerful, and I think you're right. I think if you look at what's really going with oil and the real finding costs and what could happen with technology, there's no way oil can go the distance. So the question is, what's going to be the asset that keeps giving the same powers that be that kind of control? But I don't think the price of oil is about the finding cost of oil. I think it's about control.
Let's go to Oklahoma. Robin's with us, east of the Rockies. Robin, go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
Hi.
I wanted to know, can they foreclose on a mortgage even if you're paying, and just because they might think you're just not a good risk? And if so, do we need to be putting money back? We're both on disability, and I don't get all mine because it's not supposed to go to a certain level, and I've been trying to put back because my teeth are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, what we're living on is like maybe a little above poverty level.
Right.
Maybe.
Every situation is different. Every situation is unique, so I hate to generalize, but I will tell you we've had situations across the country where people foreclose, even if you're paying the mortgage. We had one guy get foreclosed on who didn't have a mortgage, and I think you had that story on your site, George. I will tell you, just to share my experience, I did a new mortgage several years ago, and that mortgage has been traded 5 or 6 times, and every time they trade it, they try and default me. And it's like a war game. So you have to be very, very careful. It depends on whether who your servicer is, if the mortgage was securitized or not. But I would be impeccable in your payments and impeccable with your records, and take personal responsibility to track and make sure the payments are correct and everything else. You cannot assume that the servicer is honest or is trustworthy.
No, at all. Jeff in Hutchinson, Kansas. Hey, Jeff, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, well, I'm another disabled person since 2003, and I had 2 small student loans that were both under $10,000 to begin with, anyway. And I thought that I had applied for hardship, and I thought that had been accepted because I got a letter saying it was many years ago, which I, of course, lost somehow. And but about 3 weeks ago, I got a call all of a sudden out of nowhere from a collection agency saying they were wanting to collect on the student loans that I have. And I said, well, if you go to my credit report, it still shows 2 loans, but it says 0 balance. And according to my president of my local credit union, is a friend of mine, that means that I don't owe them anything because it shows 0. And I told the lady this on the phone. Of course, she differed with me. Since then, I've gotten some papers from them saying I can fill it out, and they'll tell me how much I owe. But I shouldn't know anything. I can't figure out why somebody's attacking me on the phone now.
Was it a sold note?
You have to be very, very careful. What you need to do is they are required to present documentation to you as to what you owe and why you owe it. And what you're going to have to do is go back and duplicate your records and make sure that you can prove that you don't owe anything. But I would be very careful. And again, you can never, ever assume that their intention, that they're not being fraudulent. So it's going to, in these cases, it generally takes a lot of time and work. But do everything you can to document that you don't owe them anything.
Catherine, what's going to happen when the health care bill takes over?
Oh, George, I can't imagine.
What a mess.
I'm very opposed to the health care bill.
Somebody's got to repeal it.
Well, here's the amazing thing. If you look at the deficit, we can't afford health care the way it exists now. So how that's going to, to me, the health care bill is more about tyranny than it is about health care. So I'm very opposed to the health care bill, but I think, if you look at the revenues falling to the federal government, the acceleration of the inflation coming from debasement, and then you look at what is predicted to come in terms of costs, exploding costs for Medicare, Medicaid, and all health care, something's got to give. We need literally to reinvent our paradigm about how we're going to do health, and we have to invest much more in preventative care than in the back end, because the back end is killing us.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Greensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Bill, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you. I have a question for Catherine. About a year ago, I asked my bank if they would give me probably a short-term loan, backed by gold, secured loan, and they didn't want to do it. So after a while, they said, yeah, they would do it for 12.75%.
It's pretty high when it's your own money you're borrowing, basically.
Well, yeah, and they took, one of the bailout loans, too, or whatever it's called.
What collateralization were they requiring? What percent of the loan?
12.75, and I told them I'd back it with Cougarans, gold Cougarans. They could keep in their vault or whatever.
But what was the loan to value on the collateral?
Dollar for dollar?
Oh,
if you're going to borrow 10,
I wanted to get the dental work, so I was undecided for about maybe $3,000-4,000, something like that.
But in other words, were you putting up more gold than you were getting in your loan? Because normally in a situation like that,
I was willing to do that. Yeah.
Gold is so volatile. So say if you can get a 20 to 25% correction in the most volatile period, if you were willing to post 30%, value to your loan, they should be giving you a very competitive rate.
Right. Absolutely. Now, what if he only wanted to put up 50% and borrow 100%? That
gets tougher because you're really coming down to your credit.
It's almost an unsecured loan then.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the rate, you go from a very secure rate to an unsecure rate. Now, part of the problem, George, is if you look at the banks, even though, as I said, the Fed is printing money and there's a lot more money in the system, they're not. The banks are not lending because the banks are being encouraged to lend to government. They're being encouraged to leave the money in the investment portfolios and send it back to Washington. And so what you're seeing is a lot of households and a lot of small business who are very creditworthy just can't get loans. And so even though the general liquidity in the system is driving up our expenses, the liquidity on Main Street is really, really shrinking. And so your story, Bill, does not surprise me.
A few more calls here. Roger in Shingleton, California. Welcome to the show, Roger. It's your turn. Go ahead.
Hi, George.
Hey, Roger. What's up?
I'm calling about the price of hay. I live in far northern California by the Oregon border near Mount Lassen.
Is that going up too?
Yep.
Oh, man.
Oh.
And that means
I have a question for Catherine, too, about the fact that Congress evidently passed a bill that says that the farmers can now sell directly to China. And that's impacted us greatly because our farmers, the agribusiness farmers in the area, are selling their hay to China at $50 a bale. And that's caused a crisis that the dairies have now stocked up, and they've bought every bale of hay they could get at $30 a bale, and or probably less. And now, people like me who have goats that we have to feed, and because we use the milk and it's a big part of our life. My hay is like about $18 to $20 a bale right now. For alfalfa, it's 20, and for wheat or grass, it's 18.
I had a horse farm back about 20 years ago. I think it was like $3 a bale.
Well, hay could be in a real squeeze this year, George. It's not just because of the global, sort of the global competition for food, and we are becoming, we're the breadbasket to the world. But drought, you're watching significant water problems in a variety.
Can you buy futures of hay?
I'm sure you can. I've never traded the futures.
That might be a great investment.
Well, last year we had plenty of water. I mean, we had so much water it was destroying some of the hay in the fields here in California. So, the droughts weren't an issue. We had plenty of hay. It's just that there's a bit of a panic with it. Milk is just going to go skyrocket when those people run out of hay in the barns, and a lot of the hay is going overseas. Milk is going to be more expensive than gasoline. So
food,
it's getting scary.
The one thing that everyone should be very focused on is the rising price of food and water. We just had Seattle announce the first public landscaping of an edible forest. And this, George, is a town in England that's done this.
What is this?
You replant. It came out of a permaculture work group. Very exciting. You replant the public spaces to be literally to produce food,
like gardens,
right? And the citizens who need the food as they're walking home, they just they take the plum off the tree
or grab a tomato.
Yeah, exactly.
It's free.
Right, and if you look at all the public spaces and land in this country and all the landscaping, if we redid it for edible forests, that's going to happen, because if you look at what's happening with the price of food, and it's not just the price of food that we need to be concerned about; it's the quality as well. So get ready to learn how to garden, because that's going to be, food is going to become the real luxury of the 21st century.
Tom is in Riverside, California. Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, George.
Hey.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, there's a lot of gloom and doom, involved here, but I feel that the country is more or less being maneuvered. This is not somebody screwed up somewhere in the back of the office. This is something that's being maneuvered and pushed, and we're going to end up in a situation where we're going to be compromised in this country, or that's how I think the Constitution is going to be taken out of our hands and tore up, because we're going to be in a situation where you simply don't have any choice financially on an individual basis but to capitulate. But I wanted to ask you basically what if the government was accountable, which I don't think it is on any level, but if it was accountable, what would be the road? I'm thinking maybe drills. I don't see any reason in my mind, if I was an American, if I had a president that I could elect, maybe Clint Eastwood, for instance, Donald Trump, Sarah Palin, some of these people, Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe, throw those guys in as a coalition, and they all have enormous resources.
All right, we're almost out of time. Everybody.
Okay, so my fantasy is that in every county in America, people get together and they get a hold of the consolidated financial accounts, and they look at the sources and uses of federal government and local, state and local government money in their place, and discover all the games that, if they turn around, can make them money, can generate income for small businesses locally, can create employment. Let me give you a perfect example. If I call up the food stamp hotline in my state, George, you know who I get? I get somebody in India working for J.P. Morgan Chase.
Exactly. I talked to one of those today.
Doing a job that we could do in Tennessee. So we are paying twice for something. I used to always run into places where HUD was spending $250,000 per unit to build housing where $50,000 would buy and rehab a single family home.
I got one of those calls from India today, and they wanted my Social Security number. I said, nah,
no, I
don't think so. Catherine, we're out of time. I'll see you Saturday at the Health Expo. You're on my panel.
Looking forward to it, George. Thank you so much.
All right, you be well. I'll be back in a moment as we talk Space Chronicles on Coast to Coast AM. Well, a couple of space stories. NASA's Inspector General revealed in congressional testimony that a space agency computer was stolen last year with the command codes to control the International Space Station, and also Chinese hackers gained control over NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in November, which could have deleting of sensitive files and user accounts to critical mission systems. Just a bizarre story as well. In a moment, we're going to talk Space Chronicles with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Get ready as we face the ultimate frontier right here on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, you're in for a treat tonight. Neil deGrasse Tyson, a leading astrophysicist and director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. He has begun production on a new Cosmos television series as well. It'll be sometime in the spring of 2013. Neil, welcome to the program. How are you?
Thanks. I think it's my third time doing it.
I know it. Absolutely. We keep bringing you back, and you keep coming.
Right. In fact, this time I'm actually in Los Angeles, so it's not 2 in the morning.
You know, I was going to say you were going to have a long night, but I noticed you are not too far from us.
Yeah.
Super. How have you been?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Great book.
You guys are still at it. That's good.
Yes, growing, by the way. We're everywhere. Our huge station in New York, WOR, is just doing great guns, so we're very happy about that, and things are good.
So you own the nighttime hours.
We are the nighttime hours, Neil. We are. Tell me a little bit about the Hayden Planetarium before we even get into this.
Well, you know, we built the place 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and so it's the Hayden Planetarium is now contained within the Rose Center for Earth and Space, and Frederick P. Rose and his wife gave the sort of leading gift to redo the whole facility. So we just rebuilt it. And that's what got us into trouble back in 2000 when we opened to the public, because we were the first institution to publicly reclassify, or at least place Pluto in an exhibit configuration that confounded your expectations of where it should be. We put it with the other icy bodies in the outer solar system that had been discovered, recognizing that it had much more in common with them than it did with the other 8 planets. That's what we did, and then it got picked up by the New York Times with the headline, "Pluto Not a Planet, Only in New York." And then my life went to hell.
Yeah.
And so that kind of preoccupied the first couple of years of that episode. But we're past that now, and our attendance has had record attendance over the past 3 years, even through the economic downturn in 2008. So it meant that whatever little monies people had for families, they would use it for educational purposes rather than for anything else.
You know, I remember, Neil, years ago, my father, God rest his soul, and my mother picked up a telescope for me. I joined the telescope club. I just had one great time. It got me so fascinated in
What's
science.
interesting is that astronomy is one of 2 fields where there's an important amateur component to it. So it's astronomy. You have in astrophysics you have the amateur astronomers, and ornithology you have all the bird watchers. And so we sort of have a kinship relationship. No other profession has that, right? If you're an amateur bird watcher, you probably know a lot of stuff. If you're an amateur astronomer, you know every star in the night sky.
That's right.
But if you're an amateur neurosurgeon, you're not going to watch.
Exactly. But boy, did I have fun. I mean, the guy who was running the telescope club, he had this little telescope shop. So he'd have everybody who bought telescopes as part of the club, and we'd meet once a week. But he painted, they were wooden tripod, the sticks for the telescope. But he painted them black, and then he sprinkled little white specks on them.
Okay.
And it just looked so cool. And I remember growing up in Detroit, I'd go out in the wee hours. It was freezing, 20 degrees, 15 degrees, looking at Saturn, and Mars, and Jupiter.
Right, and only crazy people do that, like amateur astronomers and bird watchers.
And I could not get enough, and it just kept fueling my career.
Right.
How about you? How did you get going into all this?
Similar. I mean, I was young. I was 9 years old. Actually, it was a first visit to my local planetarium, which, since I grew up in New York City, was the Hayden Planetarium. And, you know, the lights dimmed and the stars came out. And I was born and raised in the Bronx, one of course, the 5 boroughs of New York. And when the stars came out, I said, "Oh, this is a hoax." I know from the Bronx that there aren't this many stars in the actual night sky. So I would later learn, of course, that was an accurate representation. But to this day, when I'm on the finest mountaintops with the finest telescopes, and I look up and I see the star-filled sky, I reflect to myself that it reminds me of the Hayden Planetarium.
Absolutely.
It's a very, sickeningly urban statement to make, that the real universe reminds me of the projected universe, but that's how I felt. And I get the sense that the universe chose me, that I had almost no decision in the matter.
We're talking with Neil deGrasse Tyson, his new book, Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. Neil, when you look out into the heavens and you see all this incredible wonderment, do you question how it started, how it began?
Well, so one of the most challenging class of questions that can be asked in science are origins questions. And because typically, if you have an object, you can see what it would be like tomorrow and what it was like yesterday, or extrapolate a little in each side. But the origin of it, what was it doing before it existed, right?
That's right.
The questions get a little more complicated, and they become much more challenging to answer. So with the whole universe, the Big Bang is our best description of how the universe became what it is today. It's the most consistent concept with the data available, and it takes us all the way back to the first fractions of a second. And people always ask, well, what was around before the Big Bang? And I can answer that. And the answer is, we have no idea. It's a frontier. Actually, we have some ideas, but no data. And so specifically, it's fun to speculate, but no one is putting forth the idea for what was around before the Big Bang. And so it's a frontier, and in that case, we don't even know how we would find it out, right? I mean,
we really don't.
We just don't. Maybe because you can ask, well, how did inanimate molecules become reproducing biology, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you can imagine possibly figuring that out one day, right? Because you just keep working in the lab. Earth did it, so just keep at it, right? But the universe. But we have top people working on that now. It's a frontier, and if you're an active research scientist, the frontier actually excites you. You are drawn to it because that's where you're going to make discoveries. You're not going to keep looking where we already understand things. That we wouldn't expect that to be a fertile place to apply your intellect. So when I think of the beginning of the universe, I'm enchanted by it, and I'm called by it, and I look forward to the day when we actually have a deep understanding of it.
Theologians and those who are very religious will make an easy answer out of all this, Neil, and they'll simply say, God did all this.
Yeah, so I have two replies to that. One of them is, that you could ask that same person, well, who created God?
That's right.
And then they would say, well, God always was. So then I come back and say, okay, well, maybe the universe always was.
That's right. And maybe it's one and the same.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So then they would force me to presume that a universe that always was still must have had a beginning, but they don't hold their understanding of their God to that same standard. So I find it a fascinating sort of split in the application of that logic, because I'm not given permission to say perhaps the universe always was, but the religious person is given permission to say that God always was.
Right. Are you a believer in some kind of intelligent design?
So let me get to that in a minute, because that is the other little part of your question there. If it related to what was it? There was
we were talking about basically, is God the excuse?
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
So now holding the origin of the universe aside for the moment, if you go back through the history of science and look at all the times we had some profound ignorance about something that was going on around us. When I say history of science, I want to be very specific. Science, as we now practice it with our current methods and tools, owes its origin to about a period around 400 years ago, basically around Galileo, where you have an idea and then you test it. And then the consequence of the test gives you confidence in whether your idea represents nature or not. Before then, science, as it was practiced, didn't work that way. People just had ideas, and they just said that's how it was. So So it's Galileo onward is what I'm referring to. In those last 400 years, there have been times where people didn't understand things, and there was the urge to say that God did it.
Right.
Because God is a greater intellect than humans, and if you don't understand it, and God made the universe, clearly God understands it, and that was a perfectly fine explanation.
It also eased frustration.
Yes, because if you were uncomfortable with the unknown, that was a gap filler for you, right? And so what we found is, if you go back through history, these 400 years, there's so many cases where what was unknown then became explained with just completely natural causes, and then you can reproduce them, and then you can make it happen, and then people stop saying that God is in that gap, and they put God in another gap, and so it's basically this phrase. It's called the God of the gaps, where you have the urge to say that God is where you don't understand what's going on in the universe, and so much in the past has overridden that I don't feel confident invoking God where I don't understand something, because in the past it hasn't worked.
Right.
And so now I'm not convinced. But back to intelligent design. There's a whole video of me, one of my most viewed video clips, back from 2006. I attended a conference called Beyond Belief, and it was held at the Salk Institute in San Diego, and it was held there for several reasons, but in part, there's a huge neuroscience center there, and part of the interest of the assembled audience and the speakers, and myself included, was what's going on in the mind of someone who thinks scientifically, someone who thinks religiously, someone who has a spiritual experience. What's going on? And what does it mean to have religious scientists? Let's probe those brains. Stick whatever brain people do when they analyze the neurosynaptic profile, let's figure that out. So it was a way to intersect religious people. There were religious people there, as well as neuroscientists and even some devout atheists, like Richard Dawkins was there. And
oh,
others.
sure, yeah.
It was quite an assembly. In that workshop, I gave a talk about intelligent design, just saying that it's really, you're ignoring, if you like intelligent design, typically you're ignoring all of the things in nature that are not intelligently designed, which would then thwart the arguments that you're making. And there's all manner of things that are just, any engineer would not have done it that way. And so once you get a balanced view of what nature is doing, then it's untenable to think that what's going on around you is any product of intelligence at all.
That's interesting.
And as an example of that, if you look at natural disasters, and how many people it kills each year or throughout a century, millions of people.
Millions.
It's millions.
Yep.
Right? There's been, there was 250,000 people killed just a few years ago in Haiti, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how about the Indonesian?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Right. That's another 250,000. Right. That's 500,000 just in the last, in 2004, 2005. So there was a question that was raised by philosophers of this 18th century. It was, upon looking at natural disasters, in particular, one of the big triggering examples of a natural disaster among these philosophers was the famous earthquake in Lisbon in I think it was the 1750s. It happened on All Saints' Day. It happened in the morning. It happened when everyone was in church. And the largest structures in towns at that time
were the churches.
And so when there's an earthquake, what's the first building to collapse? The biggest structure.
The big one. And in those days, they did not make them earthquake-proof.
Yes, exactly. And so on All Saints' Day, in one of the holiest cities in Europe, an earthquake struck, followed by a tsunami. And basically Lisbon, as anyone had known it at the time, was destroyed. 80,000 people died, most of them in churches. And the philosophers said, they posed the following question. If there is a God, that God is either not all-powerful or not all good. It was an interesting sort of logical conclusion.
Well, and I've always, reading accounts in the Bible, in Genesis, I've always wondered why people are such, fearing of God. and why, this God, whoever it may be, I don't want to go off on a tangent about religion right now or God, but I just think if there is a God, it's benevolent. That God is not out to maim and murder and destroy.
Well, so it depends on what you mean by benevolent, because, of course, in the Old Testament, God would punish you if you disobeyed him. And so are you benevolent if you punish someone for disobeying you? So...
Sounds like ownership.
Well, that's a different concept of benevolence from the New Testament, where one is not punished, for wrongdoing. It's a different kind of forgiveness that goes on there. I don't know any example of forgiveness in the Old Testament. I mean, if it's there, I missed it, because most of what rises up out of that book and all that series of books are sort of vengeance and anger and for example, when Moses comes down with the Ten Commandments, I've done this experiment. You ask people, Moses comes down with the Ten Commandments from Mount Sinai, and what happens next? And people say, oh, well, he sees the revelers and the golden calf, and
he goes crazy.
He breaks the tablet, and he goes crazy. And so I said, well, then what happens? They said, oh, well, then the earth opens up, they fall in. He summons the power of God, earth opens up, they fall in, and they die. And then everything's back to normal. Okay. That's typically what people tell me. And I'd say, well, do you realize that was just the movie? That was like Charles Heston, the movie, okay? Have you actually read this account in Exodus? Have you read it? And even if they had, it's not, they must have glossed over it. What actually happens is Moses summons Aaron. They wield their swords, and they slaughter with their swords 3,000 men. Now, usually they don't count how many women they kill, because that's not, back then, they only counted the men. But if they killed everyone who was reveling, we can assume that there were as many women as men in that number. So that makes 6,000 people slaughtered by Moses, Aaron, and others who sided with him and God against these people. Now, all these people did was make a golden calf, and they wanted to take it back to Egypt. So they didn't actually kill anybody. They just sort of disobeyed God. And so that's not, I don't see that as benevolence, right?
And they probably didn't know any better.
Perhaps sure. This is a really long time ago, and societies are still being, the conduct within societies is still being formulated. But all I'm saying is that if your health or longevity is a priority of your God, then either God is not all powerful or he's not all good, because the earth spends a lot of its time trying to kill us.
Yes, it does.
And earth itself, often thought of as a haven for life, is really good at rendering life extinct.
I sometimes think the planet, pulling the old Gaia theory, is intelligent, is a living organism, and it's correcting itself.
Yeah, I once tweeted, I said, do all these earthquakes and things, and I said, Earth is just trying to shake us off its back.
Yeah, it is. It's
Earth is pissed off.
It is. It is trying to correct itself,
right? But
in a bizarre way.
Now, humans are not sort of uniquely susceptible to the forces of the Earth. What I'm saying is that the estimates are 98, 99% of all life forms that ever existed are now extinct. So it's false to assert that Earth is a haven for life, unless being a haven for life means it's just fine to render life extinct. Now, of course, I'd rather live here than Venus, where it's 900 degrees.
It's a little too hot. Neil, we're going to take this break. We're going to come back and get into your work, Space Chronicles. We're going to find out what NASA's doing. Will we ever get back to the moon? Will we ever get to Mars? Let's find out. Neil deGrasse Tyson, our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast AM. I'm George Norrie. We'll be right back. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Coast. Neil deGrasse Tyson, our special guest. And, of course, he is a leading astrophysicist, director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. We're talking about his new work, Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. Neil, are you disappointed that we don't seem to have a clear-cut mission yet with astronauts?
Well, okay, the Obama administration does have a NASA mission statement. So the issue is not whether there's a mission statement. There is. The issue is whether that mission statement is right for NASA, right for the country, or right for any other expectations the rest of us have for NASA. So that's really where the rubber hits the road. So in the Obama plan, and I was at his speech at Kennedy Space Center, which was given April 15th, and when was it, 2009, I guess? Or
almost when he was in office. So
sorry, you're right. Yeah, so it would have been, so 2009.
Would have been 2009.
Yeah, that's right, thank you. And I was at that speech, coincidentally given on tax day, April 15th, and he gave a rousing speech. His speech was always rousing, and there was an interesting line in it where he said, I want to go back to space, and I want to, go to Mars and visit asteroids. And the first time I'd ever heard a president say, let's visit an asteroid.
Yeah.
So it was very forward-looking. And in there he said, and by the way, we've already been to the moon, so why go back? Let's just skip over that. Okay. So, and that, in fact, got an applause because that's part of a more visionary statement to move on. But when you reflect on that briefly, what you realize is we were already preparing to go back to the moon before we went on to Mars. That was put forth by the Bush administration.
That's right.
And so that plan would have people transitioning immediately after the shuttle, going to work directly on the launch vehicles that would go to the moon, which would be sooner than anything that would take us to Mars. By saying, let's not go to the moon, everybody that would have worked on that moon mission essentially got laid off or reassigned, so thousands and thousands of people lost their jobs because of this. And so that created a politically tense environment for Obama with regard to NASA.
Sure.
And so it was so that's a first thing. So now there's no shuttle and there's nothing to take up American astronauts off of American soil. Yet we have the International Space Station that essentially we built with the help of international partners, but we were the lead partner in that. So how do we get to the space station? We got to hitch a ride with the Russians.
And pay them.
Yeah, so therefore, hitch is not the right word.
That's right, an expensive taxi.
When you hitch a ride on a car, they're not charging you for that, right? So we're not hitching, we're buying a seat and to ride a Russian spacecraft to go to our space station. And that's embarrassing, actually.
I agree with you.
But okay, but I can be embarrassed. I'm mature enough. I can accept that. However, it has other consequences, or what the economists would call an opportunity cost. The things that could happen that are not happening, and therefore you're worse off. If we don't have an ambitious, near-term plan to advance a space frontier, then the concept of inventing a tomorrow by advancing a frontier becomes lost from society. It already is lost from society. I'm old enough to remember the 1960s. When we were on our way to the moon, and every mission was more ambitious than the next.
And how exciting that period was.
And it was exciting because the press would get to talk about, now they were orbiting higher than ever before, faster than ever before, the first spacewalk. And each one of these, a brave person, because they're the first to ever do it, attempts to do something that has never been done before.
That's right.
And any time you do that, you need the intelligent assistance of engineers, of scientists who are designing the space gloves and designing the spacesuit and the spacecraft and all of this. And so you are driven. You need medical doctors to know how to think about what's going on to the zero-G astronaut. All of these frontier subjects are tapped, and the country sees this, and it affects and influences the culture. The culture was very forward-looking, even in the face of one of the most turbulent decades since the Civil War. It was like the civil rights movement was.
And every kid wanted to be an astronaut.
Every kid wanted to be an astronaut because you could look up and you knew that this epic adventure was unfolding right before your eyes. And that influenced you, whether or not you even became an astronaut. The culture of innovation, the culture of wanting to do something more tomorrow than you did today, permeated the entire society.
Yeah.
That's the society that gave us the World's Fair of the 1960s. That entire World's Fair was all about tomorrow. The World's Fair didn't create the 60s. The 60s created the World's Fair. And so we live in a time where nobody's thinking about tomorrow, and that coincides with no progress in advancing a space frontier. No visible progress, no progress that would have any influence on anybody. So I think the Obama plan was, then he's saying we'll go on Mars in the 2030s, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, where are you going to be in the 2030s? You're going to be like on the beach in Hawaii, right? So that'll have to be shepherded by a president to be named later on a budget not even established.
Who would probably change the program.
This is the problem. So if it's simply a presidential political decision, as it was with the Bush administration, then it's susceptible to economic wins and political wins. Whereas if it is part of the cultural directive, then it transcends economic wins and political wins, and the president then has to execute what it is the electorate demands of him.
Kennedy understood that, Neil.
Yes, and so and now the driver that got us into space under Kennedy was, of course, war. Many space enthusiasts forget this or never really factored it into their assessment of the era. The reason why that needs constant repeating, is because we went into space due to war with the Soviet Union, of course, because NASA was founded on the scare factor of Sputnik. 1 year after Sputnik, NASA became an agency. And by the way, Sputnik translates to fellow traveler. Oh, that sounds fine. Okay, that's fine. And what was inside the head of it was a radio transmitter.
Something that beeped, right?
Beep. Okay, isn't that nice? However, the military knew that what is Sputnik actually? Sputnik was actually a hollowed-out intercontinental ballistic missile.
That's right.
And so flying over our heads. And so there's the driver.
And you couldn't stop it.
You couldn't stop it. There was no mechanism. And so that spooked us. We formed NASA. We go into space. We want to control space as the next high ground. We want to go to the moon as a demonstration of this exercise. And we get to the moon and we find out Russia's not really going to the moon. Therefore, we stopped going to the moon.
I don't think they ever wanted to go to the moon.
That could be so,
yeah.
but that's not what matters. What matters is if we think they want to go to the moon, right? That's really all that drives.
Yeah, that's why we went.
That's why that drives the activity.
Heck, I was talking to Jerry Purnell, science and science fiction writer, telling me a story, Neil, some time ago, about how NASA was soliciting volunteers, and they got many, of an astronaut who they would drop down on the moon in like a bubble, and he'd live there until he died, and they would drop supplies down to him, but we would say we were the first to put a man on the moon. And it was an actual program that we were working on.
The one-way trip.
The one-way trip.
Mm-hmm.
And they had volunteers.
Yeah. So here's what happened. You have a community of space enthusiasts who saw the moon voyage, the Apollo program, and said, on the moon by 1969. We'll be on Mars by the 1980s. No. If
we should have.
If we went to the moon because we're explorers and discoverers and it's in our DNA, then Mars would be the natural next step.
That's right.
But since we went to the moon because of war and Russia was not going to the moon, it is obvious and ever present that we would stop that adventure. And so the point is, like Columbus himself was an explorer and a discoverer, but the people who wrote the checks have different motives. And so this is not widely embraced, but when you do understand it and embrace it, it empowers you to make decisions about how to re-engage that enterprise. And you re-engage it not by telling people, we just need political will, or we just need risk-takers today. We just need leaders with charisma. No, that's bull. It is a false, delusional concept. In fact, the original title of this book is currently Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. The original title was Failure to Launch, The Dreams and Delusions of Space Enthusiasts. And the publisher said, no, that's too depressing. We can't put it out.
Well, isn't it amazing that we went to the moon with 43-year-old plus technology? It's amazing.
Yeah, well, in fact, you don't really want everything that you do when you bust through the frontier to be the very latest, because the very latest things they're not battle tested, right? One of the reasons why the Soyuz capsule that we now fly to the space station with Russians is the most reliable manned vehicle there ever was, is because of its simplicity. Very few moving parts. Everything in there is kind of a blunt instrument that just sort of basically gets the job done. The astronauts are squeezed into the capsule, knees up against their chest. You look at the space shuttle, that was like a limousine. There's all this room, and I remember when the space shuttle first came out in 1981, one of the news accounts says, the space shuttle is the most complex space vehicle ever designed. And I thought to myself, they were boasting of this, and I said, do you really, is that something to be proud of? That is complex? You know?
Yeah.
And, there's something to be said for simplicity. And so, sure, one of the elements of Apollo was its relative simplicity given what it was able to accomplish.
What is happening right now with any plans for manned space exploration, for developing a rocket ship to even get off the planet?
So that's what I'm saying. So in the Obama plan, there's some background research looking at propulsion and rocket design, and they're building the Orion space vehicle.
Okay.
It's what they call the architecture of the launch system, and that's designed to ultimately take astronauts back to the space station on our own soil, but also configure a variation of that would take us out of low Earth orbit. So that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't even start this until at least 2020. And so I'm just saying that the funding that is driving this is very low and is very it doesn't have
is it organized?
No, it is organized, but it doesn't seem like people are in a hurry. It doesn't seem like there's some great imperative to get it done. And
there's no motivation.
The motivation, that's a better word than anything I've been throwing at you. The motivation is, I got a job and I'll do it in maybe, 2020 or if not 2025. And, I don't feel the urge. So a big point of this book is to say that while we went to the moon with a war driver, another driver that has been immensely successful in the history of civilizations are economic drivers.
That's right.
The urge to want to get wealthy. And that's what motivated Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to fund the Columbus voyages and the Magellan voyages. And
it was an investment for them.
A return on your investment. And so I claim that if you double NASA's budget from the half a penny on a dollar it is now to a whole penny on a dollar, then on your tax dollar, then that'll put enough money in the hopper for NASA to do all these other things people have wanted it to do, like monitor Earth and monitor the weather and all these sort of local things, and give it the budget it needs to actually advance the space frontier.
Something high profile.
That's the better word. They give it a high profile mission statement that will be on a timetable that we can all embrace. And once you do that, you recreate the innovation culture that prevailed in the 1960s and 70s. And like I said, whether or not you engage yourself in the space program, whether or not that specifically attracts you, the innovation culture pervades throughout the school system, throughout the workplace. And when you do that, even if you're not a scientist, if you're a poet or an actor, it doesn't matter. You would embrace the science and engineering fields that will help tomorrow come. Today, we're all just living day to day. In the 60s, everyone imagined the tomorrow. And when you imagine the tomorrow, you want to create the tomorrow. And so and when you create the tomorrow, you invent entire industries that didn't exist before. And that is the economic security that I'm trying to alert people that derives from reinvesting in that epic adventure.
Are we going to do that? Are we going to get there?
Well, yeah. So I'm trying my damnedest to.
You're just one guy.
In fact, this book has received an enormous media footprint, far greater than anything I would have predicted for it.
Super.
I expected some, right? And I have a Twitter following, and so people will look at it and buy it, sure. But it went beyond this. And in fact, just 2 days ago, I was called by the Senate to come into Washington next week and testify on NASA's budget and NASA's future. And so somebody is paying attention out there, and I'm going to be addressing two key senators who oversee the current and future budgets of NASA.
Kind of mention my show, Neil.
I'll see if I can give it a plug.
Yeah, see how you can leak that in.
You know what I can do? I'll say something like, from coast to coast in the United States.
That's right. That's right. Well, you're going to get a lot of calls later on tonight.
I look forward to that. You always have, your folks are...
It's a fun
I
show.
first want to know why they're awake, but other than that, they're great.
Well, 33% of the people are awake at night. Did you know that?
I didn't know. Even late, like wee hours?
Yeah. 33. And they're working.
So that's the midnight shift. I mean, the graveyard shift, I guess.
They're getting ready for early work, or they're police officers, they're security, they're nurses, they're everywhere.
Right.
It is truly amazing. Well, would you go, if this was up to you, would you go back to the moon, or would you go straight to Mars?
See, I would. That's not even the question I would ask. That's because that's not my goal. My goal, and I don't want to force my views on others, because we tell ourselves we live in a free society. Let's assume that's true, and it's in a democratic society. So I want people to just be informed and enlightened, so that when they make a decision or a judgment about how we spend our tax money, that it's an informed decision, right? So when someone says, why are we spending money up there and not down here? We need it down here. There are people with problems. That's not an informed sentence. And I'll tell you why, because go look at the federal budget. The federal budget spends 50 times, 50, not 15, 50 times more money on social programs and education than it does on NASA. So to say, why are we spending money up there and not down here? We are spending money down here. So what are you asking for? To zero NASA's budget and top off the social programs by 2%? So I want people, when they vote and when they think, to be informed. Then I feel comfortable that we get the government that we all deserve and that we all want, not the one that's handed to us because we don't know how to think. And so that was an aside. Sorry about that little commercial there. But
the question was moon or Mars?
Oh, right. So I would pose it a different way. I would say, you know what I want? I want a suite of launch vehicles that allow us to go wherever we want at any time.
Now, they're working on a booster called the Space Launch System, aren't they?
Yes.
SLS, right?
Yes, the SLS. And so that's the system that I just described.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Get us back to the space station, and the architecture of that, which that's the phrase that's used for this in this business. The architecture is still being sort of detailed.
They might do a little lunar orbit.
Perhaps, that's right. Well, yes, actually, but before landing, to remind ourselves how to actually leave low Earth orbit.
That's right.
What I'm saying is that once you have a suite of launch vehicles or launch booster ensemble, right? Take 3 from column A, 2 from column B, because you're going to an asteroid instead of a Mars. Then there could be scientific reasons to go to one destination, geopolitical reasons to go to another. There could be tourist business reasons to go. Maybe you want to mine an asteroid. And so then when you reach that state, then the solar system becomes your backyard. When it was time to build the internet system across the country, they didn't just build one road because they chose the destination that they want everyone to go to. You build roads everywhere. And now you have the freedom to go where you want. That's what a spacefaring nation needs to do.
That's a good point. Neil, we're going to take this break. We're going to come back. I want to get your views on robotic systems compared to actually sending a person up there into space. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We're talking about his work, Space Chronicles, and we'll be right back. And tonight our special guest is Neil deGrasse Tyson, his work, Space Chronicles, and we'll be back with more on space on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil, what about space robotics compared to sending humans?
Well, robots are far more capable of conducting experiments when they're well designed than any human could possibly execute. In fact, if you sent a human, you probably send them a little black box to do the experiment anyway. So now that we have robotics that can be remote controlled or even autonomous, then if scientific research is your goal, then there's no justifiable reason to ever send human beings. Really, I mean, if you could piggyback a human just for the ride, sure. I'm sure that there are rock geologists who'd love to go to Mars with a rock hammer. But when they're confronted with the option, okay, we can send you for X, or we can send a robot for 1/100th of X. In fact, you can send 100 robots.
That's right.
For what it would cost to send you. I don't know any scientist, confronted with that cost factor, that would say, send me instead of the 100 robots. Now, but all of space exploration is not science. In fact, if you look at the NASA budget, the average over its 54-year life, science has averaged no more than about a quarter of the total budget. It peaked at 40% just a few years ago, but the long-term average is down in around a fourth. All the rest is to the manned program. The manned program to build the space station, the manned program went to the moon. There are geopolitical drivers that account for that. And as long as you know that, it doesn't mean it's meaningless to then complain that science isn't getting done.